Our two speakers of today, Agnieszka Kościańska and Paulina Wawrzyńczyk. We're very happy to be here. I greet you as a scientific director of RECET. Yeah, I'm very glad you are with us today, or well, on screen at least. I will now pass the word back to Stephanie and Lucas, who have been in charge of organizing this series of events, by now, due to COVID, protracted series of events on his and her stories of transformation. Stephanie, it's back to you.
Thank you very much. So also a warm welcome from my side to today's Transformative Seminar in the name of RECET, the Research Center of the History of Transformations at the University of Vienna. Yeah, me and my colleague Lukas Becht will be chairing today's session on sex education under socialism and after. And as Janis already mentioned, this talk is part of our RECET research group on his stories and her stories of transformation, where we just try to bring together some experts from academia and civil society to just have a conversation about ways of experiencing and coping and evaluating transformations in relation with sexuality and gender. And today's focus on sexual education in Poland, but also beyond, is concerned with questions like, or we are interested in questions like how have people been learning and practicing and knowing sexuality and gender roles and gender awareness before and after '89, or what imprint did the social and political transformations leave on historical legacies and actors and structures of sexual education, and also which practical and cognitive challenges do sex educators face in Poland and also in comparison to other countries. And for today's discussion of these topics, we're most happy to welcome our guests, Agnieszka Kościańska and Paulina Wawrzyńczyk. Agnieszka is an anthropologist, associate professor in the Department of Ethnology and Cultural Anthropology at the University of Warsaw, and currently Leverhulme visiting professor at the University of Oxford. And her latest book on the history of Polish sex education has just been translated into English and was published recently by Berghahn Books. With the title To See a Moose, the History of Polish Sex Education. And Agnieszka has published widely on gender, sexual violence, queerness, discrimination, religion, and so on, and apparently strongly believes also in public and engaged anthropology. So therefore she's actively engaging also in various non-academic formats. And you also can follow her many activities on her personal web page. Paulina Wawrzyńczyk is currently an education and well-being specialist at Brook, which is an organization that is operating a number of sexual health and well-being services across the UK. And Paulina here delivers relationship and sex education sessions in schools and youth sites. She was originally born and raised in Warsaw. She got her MA in literature and used to teach Polish as a foreign language. But already then she simultaneously volunteered as a sex educator and reproductive rights advocate with Ponton, which is a group of sex educators that has been working since 2002 to provide young people in Poland with decent sex education. And Paulina's activism also led her to a political career. She was supporting a Polish member of the parliament. But I think since 2017, so after 11 years of fighting for comprehensive sex education in Poland, Paulina moved to London to work with young people there, and apparently is highly motivated to continue her sex positive mission in other countries of the world. So welcome to both of you, and thank you for being with us and for sharing some insights into your work with us. As we already mentioned before, this talk is really envisioned as a conversation between our two guests. So feel free, both of you, to interact and comment to each other, on each other, or ask each other questions without too much intervention from us moderators. And it will also be possible to place some questions in the chat during our two guests talking. So please feel free, if there are some urgent questions or comments, to place your request in the chat. But there will for sure also be a question answer in the second half of the session. So I think that would be all from my side. So I now hand over to my colleague Lukas Becht, and I'm really looking forward to the two of you sharing some insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you also again to Paula and Agnieszka for being with us. I'm extremely glad. And should say that I was one of the beneficiaries of Paula's language teaching. So I'm thankful to her, and this is why I speak Polish right now. So I'm extremely happy that we have you today. And I think before we go into analyzing or talking about the history of sex education, most of us will need some sense of what this is actually like, what it is about, and what we are actually talking about. So I would ask you, Paula, to maybe try and take us with you into such a typical situation that you are facing. How does it actually look like? What are you doing when you are educating, and what experiences are you making? And maybe already, although we will follow up with questions on that, you can also take us back to what sex education looked like when you did it in Poland, in Warsaw back then.
Absolutely. Hi everyone. Thank you for having me. So what exactly is sex education? It's a big field of knowledge, I would say. So sex education has different names depending on the country you're coming from. So in the international documents, it's sometimes called CSE, Comprehensive Sex Education. I use, because I'm based in London, we use the British wording, which is RSE, which is Relationships and Sex Education. This is how it's nowadays called in English schools. But regardless of the name, how we call it, it's more or less a similar thing. So it comprises of various topics. So it's all like about human sexuality in general. This is how I would put it. But so what we exactly teach is introduction to sexual health. So things like contraception, STIs, consent and the law. This is absolutely essential. This is probably, according to me, the most important part of modern sex education, preventing sexual abuse and sexual violence. This is our mine probably biggest mission. But also things like gender identity, sexual orientation, gender roles, very important because they still impact a lot of how people behave and what people expect in relationships from each other, healthy relationships as well. And many more. So I could keep going, but this is the core of what we teach, both what I did in Poland and what I do in the UK. I will compare these two countries a little bit because it also gave me a lot more perspective of how a sex education is done or can be done, and it's really good to compare how it happens in different countries. So so I started with the Ponton group of sex educators, which is a group of volunteers affiliated with the Polish Federation for Women and Family Planning, which is the biggest Polish NGO advocating for legal abortion, access to contraception, and women's rights in general. Ponton is a part of it, and as I said, it's a volunteer-based organization, so it's really small, and it's based in Warsaw. We have been working now for 20 years, which is pretty amazing. And when I was in Warsaw, I did not directly work with young people, but we did sessions in schools. So it was usually like a 1.5 hour session, just intro to all these topics that I mentioned, because we were volunteers and we did it in our free time. So because we knew that our impact would be a little bit limited if we just focus on that. That's why we, from the beginning, we also focused a lot on advocacy and promoting the idea of comprehensive sex education across everywhere, so in the media. Although back then, schools were more keen actually to have us, and they invited us because, well, as everywhere across the world, teachers are not prepared, are not trained to deliver sex education, so they were never super comfortable with this topic, at least the majority. Of course, there are some amazing sex educators in Poland who also work in schools, but this is still not very common. So they invited us, like external experts. However, we also wanted to help young people directly, so we always did it online. So we had and still have an online forum where young people can ask us anonymous questions, and we answer them. We have a helpline that's again. So this is how people from across the country can reach us. Email, that also always worked. We did summer hotlines again for young people, so they could text us, they could send us messages if someone is too shy to give us a call. And this is absolutely crucial because there are no sexual health services for young people in Poland. So we had to kind of do both, so kind of provide them also medical advice because they didn't know who to ask and where to go, because, well, in reality, there are no such places or like special clinics for young people. I would say that what was also very important is to promoting this idea through media channels. So I would say that media in Poland were very good and supportive with this idea. So we were often present in the media. This is what I did a lot. So we were in TV, in breakfast TV. That is absolutely brilliant because actually many people watch it. So we were often present there. Radio stations, through internet channels. Now, obviously, it's YouTube and other social media. So internet was a game changer, of course, for everything, but also for sex education. So we could reach out to more and more people. So through all of these channels, we tried, and we still keep doing it. Okay, I can go on, but Lucas, maybe you have a question for me because I can keep going.
No, I find it extremely interesting. We as we said, we invite also as we go ahead questions in the chat so we can pick them up if they fit what we are actually talking about. I would like to add up one small question because I remember very well when we met in Warsaw. It's quite a while ago right now already, that we sometimes talked about this telefon zaufania, this helpline, and you told me that this is so crucial. And I wonder if you could go on that occasion or on this example a bit more into what young people actually bring to you. What are their questions or the problems they bring to you, and why do you think sexual education is so important, necessary, or also what are the problems you are facing? And then next we will go into analyzing and also trying to see other sides and actors. Okay.
So all anonymous questions that we got through different channels were absolutely essential for us because this is how we collected data as well, because we produced reports. And if you go to our website, you can also find them translated in English because we needed data to provide to, for example, the Ministry of Education, because we advocated for comprehensive sex education everywhere, but we also wanted to change the medical law around accessing medical services in general for people who are under 18. So all of this, so we really paid attention to what young people told us, what they brought to us. And because sex is still a taboo in most societies across the world, and we know, again, from asking young people, we know that parents do not feel comfortable discussing these topics with their children, and they would actually rather avoid it. Or if they say something, it's unfortunately more negative than sex positive, actually. So it's more like scaring people or just saying to them, just don't do it. So because young people don't have the support network at home, but they still have issues and they need to talk to someone. So they were always very happy to have someone to open up, and it could be a variety of different things. So relationships problems, so sometimes abusive relationships. This could be fear because they might have gotten pregnant, or they just think they might be pregnant because they didn't have exact knowledge how pregnancy happens, and there are many myths around it, so they needed support with that. They had questions about contraception, sometimes about STIs as well, or pleasure, like they asked us about how to have better sex and how to have good sex and how to actually enjoy it. So variety of different things. We helped as much as we could, but obviously, again, we were only one small group who couldn't provide as much as we wanted to. So that's why the advocacy work was always super important, and I was also involved with that. So we collected all the data, we wrote reports and research, and then we provided it to schools, but also to the Ministry of Education. So I met probably 2 or 3, it was a long time ago, so I don't remember, ministers of education. And unfortunately, regardless of the political party that they were from, because these changed, but unfortunately the mindset did not change. It was always kind of the same. So still politicians, even though privately they maybe supported the idea of comprehensive sex education, they just didn't do anything. So not much has changed. However, the law in Poland is not actually bad. On paper, it's not bad, I would say. Even right now, it still gives an opportunity to teach sex education. So actually, the school subject like this exists, and it should be taught 14 hours every year from the 4th class of primary school, which is from the year like when they are 10 years old. So when they are 10 years old, it should start, and then throughout many years, sex education can be actually taught in schools. So this doesn't look bad. The problem is the approach of the ministry and then all the agencies, like government agencies, that now they actually discourage the idea of comprehensive sex education. But still, there are many teachers who, if they feel brave enough, they will do like what they want against the government. But the problem is it has to come from the top. And if all the negative information comes from the top, many people fear, and many people just don't want to touch this subject at all.
Okay, great, thank you. That also led us into somehow the state of the art today in a brief outline, and I think it gives us a great occasion to ask Agnieszka to comment and give us a bit more food on the historical background. You said that the mindset did not change and little is changing with political affiliations. How does it look like over the course of the 20th century, or the research you've been doing, Agnieszka? Is there also so little change going on, or what about continuities and changes if we take a broader historical perspective regarding sex education in Poland?
Thank you for this question, and thanks for organizing this and inviting us. Well, so I mean, maybe 2 major thoughts here. So first of all, Paula just said about how Ponton and other sex educators collect questions from young people through helplines and other channels. So the vast majority of materials I analyzed for my work on the history of sex education in Poland was exactly that. There were letters and questions asked by young people. So I had letters from the 1950s, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, the 1990s, and so on and so forth. And what's really striking in all those questions, so they were from various sources, because they were either from the press, or they were sent to the Polish Planned Parenthood, or it was called Towarzystwo Rozwoju Rodziny, but it was sort of affiliated with Planned Parenthood. And now this organization became a part of the Federation for Women and Family Planning, of which Ponton is part too. So there were all those letters from various sources, and these letters and questions were the context was different, but the questions were the same. They were just the same questions asked again and again and again. And so I could just repeat the topics Paula just mentioned. So people asking about contraception, people asking about sexual orientation, about when is the best time to have your first sex, and so on. So there were a lot of questions, and of course a lot of issues related to violence, consent. So these are the topics that young people really want to know, and we often tend to think, oh, that young people are so irresponsible. But if you look historically at those questions, there are really young people who want to know these things before they start. So that's I think that there is a huge need for this that could be documented in those historical sources. But what is changing is how adults react, and politicians, teachers, activists react to those questions. And I had a look at the history of Polish sex education since the early 20th century, and it really goes that a lot was going on. You could think that, well, in a country like Poland, there was nothing. When I was asked to write a book about it, but so I thought, okay, it will be maybe 100 pages, because there was nothing. And then after a few years, I ended up with 400 pages book, and I really had to cut it to put everything there. And but I think that the Polish history of sex education really goes against our thinking that there's certain progress in the history of sexuality, that we go from towards better and better, and especially from bad socialism to good post-socialism, to good capitalism, because this is absolutely not how it developed. So if you look, just not to take too much time, but if you look at how sex education developed in Poland, in schools and beyond. So it starts in the very early 20th century, when first classes are being organized. They are perhaps not like today's Ponton's classes of sex education, but they were really strong attempts to talk to young people about reproduction, and a lot about gender roles. And what's really striking in those early 20th century curricula and or sort of handbooks is that quite a few of them are really progressive when it comes to gender equality. So for instance, arguments like, well, there is a big, because one of the reasons sex education was seen back then as such important issues were what was called back then, venereal diseases, so sexually transmitted diseases. So we will not finish with them if we don't have gender equality, because then women can consent to sex. They are not forced into what was called back then prostitution and so on, and we need gender equality for that. So that was going on in the early 20th century, and then after World War I, when Poland became an independent country, sex education was introduced into Polish school quite quickly, sort of sex education. And then after World War II, in the 50s, there was not so much, but then first lessons appeared in the mid 60s and continue till the end of socialism in more or less the same form. And they were and they differ from school to school, and often people from Planned Parenthood were invited to teach this, but there was quite a lot published on sex education, and those manuals were often not so explicit about sexuality. So they wouldn't say they were good books for teenagers, but not necessarily so open about sexuality, until the mid-1980s, when there was a first Polish, really progressive handbook of sex education written by 3 authors from the Polish Planned Parenthood, but mainly by Wiesław Sokoluk. And this handbook, which was published in 1997, was like really comprehensive sex education tool, and it talked a lot about sexual pleasure. It said that homosexuality is just the same as heterosexuality. There's no difference. Only homosexuals are just the same as heterosexuals. They just love somebody else. And so there were all those things, and really for the 1980s, you could say progressive. And this handbook survived in schools only for 2 months. After 2 months, it was kicked out from schools, was still under socialism and under the pressure of the Polish conservative milieus, and especially the Polish Catholic Church. The handbook was pushed out from schools, and then in the 1990s, Polish sex education in schools, not outside, the official side of this, was organized by the very same people who pushed out the progressive handbook out of schools back in the 1980s. So the transition from socialism to post-socialism or to capitalism would be in the field of sex education would be like a major backlash when it comes to official curriculum. So the handbook from the 1980s discussed, places really stressed young people agency. So young people were told, well, this is the knowledge, and then you should think for yourself what you want to do. Do you want to have sex with this person? Do you want to wait, or this is how you do birth control and so on? And then there was this huge moral panic around this handbook, saying, well, this is demoralization of children and so on. And then handbooks from the 1990s onwards would say, well, you shouldn't have sex before marriage because this is a sin. So that was a really huge difference. But at the same time, after communism, you have a lot of organizations like Ponton. Ponton, of course, is the most known, but it's not the only one, who worked with schools to teach young people about sexuality and do the work Paula was talking about. So I think that just not to go too far into details, I think we could see the development of the history of sex education in Poland, not as a constant progress, but sort of a progress under socialism until the late 80s with this handbook, and then total regress when we at least talk about official curriculum in the 1990s onwards. I don't know if that would be something you, Paula, would agree, but that is getting worse, basically. And now, last year, when Poland was in the first lockdown, Polish Parliament seriously discussed the law that would put people in jail for doing sex education, calling this promotion of pedophilia, which is encouraging children to have sex. That was seriously discussed. So maybe I stop for now.
Paula, would you like to add up to that?
So yeah, you mentioned these textbooks that are kind of officially approved by the Ministry of Education. So this is how Polish system works. So some books are officially approved, but unfortunately for sex education, which the school subject in Poland is called like upbringing for family life. This is the official name for it, and there is no choice of handbooks at all. There is the only ones that are approved by the ministry are radically Catholic, and they do not present any other perspective. But the majority of Polish schools are not faith schools, and this is really important. So they should all be secular, and all education should be secular. The problem is these handbooks are really, really bad, and but the good thing is they don't have to be used. So teachers who teach sex education do not necessarily use them. So they use their own resources, they use their own materials, and they are free to create their own programs. So at least some of them do.
Yeah, this is.
Okay.
No, if I could just jump in here with this one sentence, that when I collected materials for this book, I did a lot of sort of participant observation in the spaces where sex educators are being trained, and this is exactly what happens. That some of them are really well trained, but then others are not trained at all, or they are just being forced to teach this. So then there's, I mean, music teacher, for instance, sent to talk with young people about sex, which they just don't know how to do it, and they get red on their face and so on. So I think this and this is like something. There's a strong continuity in Poland, and I think not only in Poland, through history, that there's a lot of the experience is very diversified, depending, it differs from school to school, teacher to teacher, and there's no really unified model for this.
I think we have already 2 questions in the chat that might be a follow-up to what Agnieszka just said. Perhaps, Julia, you would like to speak up yourself instead of me reading your question.
Yes, thank you very much. It was just about this question of family planning, because it also exists in France, it exists in other countries, and I would like to know if there is like an international model of family planning, or if every country labeled its institution like this. So if there were transfer of model, transfer of knowledge, of practices, or if this kind of dealing with family was national, or if there was also some international trends.
Agnieszka, do you want to? If you want to answer,
I can, but go ahead if you want to go first.
I will start. So there are international guidelines when it comes to both sex education and provision of sexual health services. However, there are no institutions who would actually hold governments accountable, and this is the biggest problem. So although like, for example, Polish representatives have to talk about it in front of the UN. The problem is there is no power that would actually verify what they actually say and force them to actually do these things that they claim that they're doing. So most governments just pretend that they're involved in this topic. So obviously public health, this is a matter of public health. But yes, there are international guidelines. There are models that could be easily transferred, and yes, of course, like for example, Ponton, the Federation, we always learned a lot from big international organizations like mentioned here, Planned Parenthood, for example, or we had also international donors who obviously made our work possible. So we always exchanged ideas, and we collaborated also not only with the Western countries, but also with Eastern countries, or like Asian countries as well.
Yeah, I would like to add to that also historically speaking, there are a lot of networking that wouldn't be that obvious. So for instance, during the Cold War, there's a lot of collaboration between Planned Parenthood organization East-West. So for instance, the Polish Planned Parenthood Association, I mean, I use this name, it was called differently in Poland, changed names quite a few times, but it was first sort of acted informally before World War II, but then it was re-established in 1957 in Poland as it was called the Society for Conscious Motherhood, and it had direct links to Planned Parenthood in the UK. So there was a lot of and then people from this organization would, for instance, collaborate with therapists or sexologists in Czechoslovakia So that was there's a lot of international exchanges within this. And for instance, one of the major Polish sexologist and sex educator under socialism told me that he traveled a lot to the West through Planned Parenthood networks, and would bring to Poland not only various new contraceptive methods, but also pamphlets on gay and lesbian liberation movement from the States. So I think that there's also a lot of sort of semi-formal collaborations and models that are forged in international collaboration, and has been historically forged like this. If you have a look historically, so there's Magnus Hirschfeld, who was active already in the early 20th century, and he established what was called the World League of Sexual Reform, which was one of the first activist organizations, sexual rights organization, and it has its own chapter, Polish chapter, and so there was. So I think this field is really transnationalized from the very beginning, but at the same time, the opposition against sex education or sexual reform or whatever you call it is also really a transnational field. So there is a lot of exchange between Polish anti-sex education circles and, for instance, American ones. So yeah, so I think that there are a lot of transnational exchanges, but not necessarily like set models that could be implemented from one place to another.
Thank you very much.
So thank you both, Julia and Paula and Agnieszka, for answering. Rosie, would you like to add your question?
Sure, thank you. So I just wanted to ask about, so far we've been discussing sex education as the preserve of youth, and I just wondered if that was historically the case, that youth had been seen as the prime targets for education in Poland, and if there had been perhaps other groups historically, so ethnic minorities, maybe married women, who seem to be like targets for education, and how and why you think they kind of appeared on the radar of policymakers and sex educators, and then how they disappeared off that radar.
So should I reply? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so yes, definitely there are other groups. I mean, of course, when we in my book, I focused on sex education addressed to young people, but of course there were a lot of actions to other groups. Mostly, I think, women. And basically, historically speaking, if you look at any form of I know, health manuals or all sorts of lifestyle manuals, Polish ones, they would be always addressed to women. So women would be the ones who are responsible for health and well-being of their families, and therefore also for sexuality. So definitely there's a lot of maybe not necessarily classes, but books, manuals for women about sexuality. Not so much, for instance, addressed towards LGBTQ communities. However, I also conducted a series of interviews with senior gay men, senior gay men and senior lesbians, who would say how much those sex books, in which there were just a few pages on homosexuality, was this kind of I know, in the 1970s, was this kind of really necessary knowledge. So and then I also encountered letters, some kind of internal correspondence between one of the Polish sex educators and actually Vienna-based Institute of Homosexuality, when he was saying that he puts all these things in his books because he knows how important it is he cannot just write a book for homosexuals, but address to gay people, but then he just puts a little here and a little there so they have something. So that was also this informal element. Now I'm talking about the 1970s and 80s. And as for ethnic minorities, I honestly didn't encounter anything. I don't know, Paula, maybe you have some idea here?
No, nothing. Well, Poland is a very, I think, ethnically homogeneous country, so I've never encountered anything either. However, from the public health perspective, the only the government agenda for HIV/AIDS prevention. So yes, it has existed in Poland, and this is the only like a government body that actually does something. So educates anyone probably, because they had campaigns. Well, basically to all adults, like the whole adult population. So we can see sometimes billboards, like posters in major Polish cities. So yeah, they have been doing these campaigns, but it's only focused on HIV and AIDS. No other STIs are mentioned there.
Yeah, I think, and I hope that we will get back to talking about what are the actors in this field, because I think I had the impression that we were somehow circumventing the role of the Catholic Church a little bit until now. You mentioned it, but I think it was like the elephant in the room a little bit, that it's always very active and very much there. But I think that is something we could also leave for further questions from the audience. What I wanted to, like in my role as a moderator, inject at this point again is in reaction to Agnieszka's overview. I think what interests us most, or quite a lot, especially here at RECET, is this mixed record of the transformation. And the story you're presenting in your book is highly interesting for us, because you're shattering this idea that, you know, there is a move from, as you put it, from bad socialism to good post-socialism, that there is a certain teleology within transformation, and that there is kind of it, because it's an underlying process of progressive change. And I wondered, I wanted to ask you again is it just a regress instead? So how mixed is this record actually? Because I still can't believe that it's just such a negative story, but maybe this is just, you know, to provoke you to reinforce your argument. But when I was reading your book, I was wondering whether it's not too pessimistic, but maybe it is like this. And I'm, you know, this is one thing. And still, I must say, when reading it, I was struck that so many of the discursive schemes of the moral panic you are talking about the arguments that are present nowadays, seem to have been exactly the same in the situation you were talking about in the late 1980s, with this handbook being shredded. So would you say that apart from this mixed record, maybe, of the transformation, there is a long legacy or a long line of continuities of certain arguments, of certain discursive modes of reacting to these issues that shape our present situation and kind of go back before 1989.
Yeah, I think definitely it's even longer than till the 1980s, but perhaps you can trace it, you know, through entire 20th century. That you have, for instance, in the early 1930s, you have a huge debate around abortion, access to abortion, and then this is combined with some ideas about sex education and education about birth control. So, and then you have personal links on both sides of this debate that could be just step by step, you know, recover from today back to the 1930s. So I think that there's this really so this argument, of course, in many ways now the major problems and I mean, the major debates now in Poland are when it comes to sexuality and gender. There are things like what is called gender ideology and LGBTQ ideology, which are presented as this kind of brought from the bad West ideas to destroy the Polish nation. But then if you look at these arguments, they are very much similar to the arguments in the 1980s, and they're the same people or the same groups, or more or less the same groups making this argument. So I think that these debates are also locally, they have international components, of course, but they also are locally rooted. And as for the transformation, good or bad, I think that then we just have to stress that they're both. That we cannot just so easily say, well, it was great under socialism and now it's a total disaster, and especially we cannot say other way around. But then if you look at official curriculum, and if you look at those handbooks or manuals, there would be way more progressive under socialism. But of course, we didn't have organizations like Ponton back then. So it's, and there is a lot of grassroots activism which developed since the 1990s. So I think that we should look at transformation from socialism to capitalism when it comes to sexuality, but not only as something that really change. There was a change, but it cannot be so easily valued as good or bad, because there is a lot. And of course, I can see that Kristen Gotzi is in the audience, and how she argued. I know if she will say something from herself. But her argument about economic independence of women as an important element for good sex, and the same with sex education. If there is if educators are not dependent on the market and who pays them, but they are just hired by the state, which is not a religious state like our states now, then it's because there's of course the issue of the church, which became way more powerful after '89. So I think this is a really multi-layer change, and not just I think we should just drop once for all this thinking on like that there's some kind of linear development that leads us from point A to point B, but there are a lot of factors here in play.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is an important observation. We should bear in mind, and we might get back to this, because I think if we think about it as a non-linear process, then there are a lot of unfinished and open-ended businesses, and we might, and I would suggest that we open up the discussion right now, because we already have we're already quite some time into the session, and maybe have a final round then where we give you, Agnieszka and Paula, the word to reflect on present day challenges and kind of on these open-ended, unfinished businesses. But now I would encourage you to ask questions. We already have one. I think we used to have a ritual that whenever you want to speak up for a comment or a question, please put a sign, for example, a plus into the chat, then we can see who's willing to speak and give you the word. And we already have one question. You're of course also free to write your question into the chat, and we can then read it out loud. I would go straight into giving the word to Yanis, who already put a plus into the chat. Yanis, please.
Yes, thank you, Lucas. My question actually, follows up on some of the things that have been said so far, especially, Rosie's question about national minorities. to which Paula replied that Poland is a pretty homogeneous country, which is true now, but which hasn't always been the case. So my historical question would be, and that's probably then to Agnieszka, is there like a history of, for instance, since you mentioned Magnus Hirschfeld, that got me thinking, is there sort of a tendency to associate this kind of family planning, etc., with Jews? You know, it's not just a Western idea, but a Jewish idea, which then might feed into all kinds of ideas about it being harmful to the Polish nation, in particular as a Christian nation, which then would bring in the elephant in the room once again, the Catholic Church, but also just nationalists more generally. I wonder if you could comment a bit on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is like a great question, which allows me to speak about nationalism and so on. And yeah, and then I think that just to come back to Paula's comment, I think Poland is way more diverse that we could see from the, you know, on the surface, and I think there was a lot of work done, especially under communism, to present Poland as monoethnic. But then yes, but of course already in the late 20s and 30s, sex education was very much presented as the Jewish thing, that, you know, so first it was present before World War I. It was presented that this is something that, you know, partitioning powers, so, you know, Russia and Germany and you know, the Habsburg Empire, they are doing this to us, you know, to destroy the Polish youth. So there are a lot of arguments that these are dangerous things done by outsiders. And then in the interwar period, it goes to anti-Semitic arguments that these are that this kind of things are very much Jewish teachings, and has to be, you know, and especially and that's the Polish national democracy would go very much that this is a threat coming from Jewish people, and this is really interesting that then if we jump 100 years later, the Polish episcopate published a letter against pastoral letter against gender ideology, and they would use exactly the same phrasing as were used in the 1930s, presenting this, you know, that there are those wealthy groups that would like to destroy the Polish nation. So this is like a classical anti-Semitic argument used 100 years later. I mean, and the same rhetorics used against the milieus of the Polish sexual reform back in the 1930s. So yes, so definitely it goes like this. But then if we want to talk about the Catholic Church, then we also have to remember about internal diversity of Catholicism in Poland, not only in Poland but also in Poland. That they would I have in the book I have an entire chapter on this, showing a lot of really progressive conversation within the Catholic Church in the 1960s in Poland, and then this conversation I being gradually silenced by Karol Wojtyła, who later became the Pope John Paul II, who when it comes to family planning was and sex education was just extremely conservative. So, and then the current situation is a result of that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Very much so. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we have a comment in the chat, but I don't really see that this is a question. But Michał Boni had to go, and he thanked for the debate. Stating that the key issue for Poland now is the extreme conservatism of peace, and he describes it as a war. Those who don't know, I think most people know the name and know who Michał Boni is. I don't know if he left, I think, right now. He's a member of European Parliament right now, I think, for the now oppositional civic platform. And yeah, I think it's interesting that this is a war to him. So I might want to play that back and take this as one of his questions. He hopes that Poland will come back to the civilizational mainstream. And this notion of war, you can get this. I mean, you get this impression when you read media and the discussion in Poland about these topics. But I wonder whether there isn't also some undergoing structural changes related to technology, to cultural influences, which which no government can block, for example, and also economic changes maybe. And maybe you could delve on that a little bit more. Also, Paula, if you could say that, I liked very much in Agnieszka's book this distinction between official and self-education. And I think on the ground you're experiencing that as well. So aren't there processes going on which are somehow linked, but in a way have a certain room of independence from those cultural or political wars?
Who goes first? Okay, so you raised many topics in your question. So I will. So firstly, well, the war. I'm not a fan of putting this. Of course, I would rather want to see and like potential hope for the future. I don't want to see these two polarized positions as like totally opposite. I believe that well, unfortunately, we were always accused as like kind of being paid by the West or like being paid by big, especially pharmaceutical companies. So this is another argument. So now maybe not that much anti-Semitism, but now these are the bad guys, like pharmaceutical companies that want to make money on young people or things like that. So this is used against us. But the thing is, like very conservative, like Polish religious organizations are actually also part of big international organizations, and they are also sponsored like that, but it's not, I think this knowledge is not very common in Poland so far. Some people know it, but it's not really that much discussed. So yeah, whose agenda is it, and yeah, what do they want to win? But coming back to young people, I think young people, they are very, very vulnerable, and people who are very conservative at the young age or like very right wing, I think what they need is actually support, and they need to be listened to. Like these are not bad people, and I don't want to have it. I don't want any war with them. Basically, I would like to see a dialogue, and I would like to understand them better. So we should. That's why it's so important to have such debates and to learn more about it. And obviously it's easier when people are well educated, because then they speak other languages, then they can obviously access other resources, and they can find a lot of information on the internet. So if it starts, yes, I would like to start from there. So actually investing more money in education and like teaching foreign languages, this actually can really help, and I believe society, this is the way to go, basically. Okay, I will let Agnieszka say something.
Yeah, so I would like to build on what you said about not liking the framing this as a war, and I also don't like it, because I think it really so what I was trying to show in the book, which I think it's something we see through the entire period and through the entire 20th century and later, that there are all those fights between adults about how we should educate young people about sexuality. Well, young people they always know, want to say the same things. They want to learn the same things, and they're being left alone in this. And not only by this government, but also earlier governments didn't. Always sex education was some kind of unwanted child of any government, and they were all just pushing this away. So I think that and I think historically we have a lot of examples of dialogues between people from various groups that were trying to find a common ground in order to for some kind of, I know it sounds maybe too idealistic today, but maybe there's some kind of common good we should try to achieve through dialogue, not through conflict. But maybe I'm just over idealistic for today's perspective. Paula, you wanted to?
Yeah, because obviously now I work in a very different context because I'm based in London, so I teach people coming from all like ethnicities, all backgrounds, to completely different communities. So it absolutely can be done. So religion is absolutely not an obstacle for comprehensive sex education, and but it has to come from the government. This is the most important thing, because the law in the UK has recently changed. So sex education was never compulsory in British schools, but now it is. So it has changed a lot. So we also make alliances with faith leaders or with churches. So the Church of England also published their opinion on sex education, and it's really happening. So it is really not an obstacle. So when people have good intentions and they actually think about young people and they take their well-being into consideration, it absolutely can be done.
So maybe just one more word, because of course there are limits to that. And for instance, recent development when it comes to abortion in Poland, really, and the conflict around this is something that really closes anyway dialogue, because the level of public emotions related to this is just so high that there's not so much space for conversation. And I do research on Catholic approaches to birth control, and before the protest and of course before the ruling of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal in October, I did quite a few interviews with women who are anti-abortion activists, and they all wanted to talk to me because this is what I think. I think we should talk about these things, not on a private level, not only argue in politics. And they said, well, yeah, we would like to present our view, but now with all those really strong emotions, this kind of conversations are really difficult. So I think, and so this is what we said, what I said in the beginning. It's getting worse in the sense that the issue is that adults' conversation is so politicized and so emotional and so angry that there's not so much space for young people here and what they really want to know.
So any further questions from the audience? Claudia Kraft.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a fascinating conversation, and I was wondering if there is another elephant in the room, and it's not the Catholic Church, but it's economy. Because when I'm thinking about the 1920s, 1930s, the eugenic discourses and discourses about family planning were very much dominated by right-wing politicians, pointing at the not so valuable stratum of the Polish society, which should not be encouraged to reproduce this stratum. And when I'm looking at now the 21st century, of course, we can talk a lot about the political and cultural changes, and what was Lucas was hinting at, that things will change automatically because cultural settings are changing. But there is a lot of a huge part of the population which is not so much affected by this cultural change, I've got the impression, or does not have the possibilities to buy contraceptive things or go to a kind of family planning institution. And I was wondering if the piece with this 500 zloty money for families with more than 2 or 3 children, if this is not something which we have to take into account, that it's not only about lifestyle and not only about cultural influences from the West, perhaps in the bigger cities, but that something very different is going on in the countryside. And I would like to hear perhaps Paula's opinion about how one can change this, because I'm sure that people in the countryside, they are not just, I would say, there's no natural heteronormative lifestyle, but how to get access to different forms of lifestyles and different forms of reproduction and so on and so forth. I think this is also a class question.
It's a great question. I will pass it on to Agnieszka because I really enjoyed her chapter about the rural approach to human sexuality in Poland. So she will, I think she will be better to answer it.
Okay, I'm sorry. So then you will have to listen to me again. Okay, so yeah, so let me say, yeah. So I have a chapter on the history of rural sex education, in which I'm trying to show that we, as educated, I don't want to say educated members of the urban elite, but with people from universities and everything, we just have those really strong assumptions about what's going on in the countryside, and especially I'm an anthropologist, so in the Polish context, these were 19th century ethnographers who invented how we thought about the countryside, and if you look at like actual practices and also folklore, there's quite a lot of sexual diversity and sexual freedom within this. I don't want to over exaggerate here that it was great, but to some extent there was more freedom than in many urban spaces, and especially upper class spaces. So and I think that also today, if you look at issues such as birth control, Poland has the lowest birth rate in Europe nowadays. So people do use various contraceptive methods all over. So it not only in Warsaw or Krakow, but also in other cities. So I think but of course there is economic element to that, and economic element to that supports electoral victories of peace. So there was certain change of thinking about economy and thinking about redistribution that they proposed, which really make change. That it wasn't only the attack on gender ideology that make them win. So I think, and just to give you an example from sex education and the countryside. So this is from my fieldwork, in which I and this is sorry, Paula, this is in the in the book. So I conducted participant observation in one of those classes for sex educators, for future sex educators or teachers who do sex education and would like to be better qualified. And so they discussed the idea that pupils should go and see a gynecologist. I mean, not like CC as a medical advice, but there's a school excursion to get to know your local gynecologist and see how the clinic looks, and so maybe girls, if they are in need, they know where to go. So that was the suggestion, and all the teachers, all the people taking this course who are teachers say, oh, no, this is not going to happen. This won't be possible, because what parents would say, what the school will say, no way. Well, I'm not going to make it. And if we cannot do it in Warsaw, we are sure nobody anywhere else, it won't be possible. And then there was this very shy girl, young woman in the corner, and she was from the most stereotypical Polish backward place. The place when you think about backwardness in Poland, this is the place. So she's from there. And I said, well, I went with my pupils to see a gynecologist. No problem at all. Everybody was very happy. Plus, children had some lesson of tolerance because the gynecologist was from Africa. So he was Black. So children not only met a gynecologist but also a Black man. And could talk to him and so on. So I think, and this really shows us how we think about these issues, and that the countryside has this different dynamics that is not necessarily based on certain ideas we think that's going on there. So that was also quite surprising for me, because I was brought up within this Polish ethnography, where we as ethnographers knew the best how backward the country was. So I'm using this backward in quotation marks. I don't know if that answers your question. And then maybe if I could just say one word about eugenics in the interwar period. But there were also a lot of I mean, the Polish League of Sexual Reform, which were people like Boris Żeleński or Irena Krzywicka, they also supported eugenic ideas. So I think, and of course it wasn't like anti-Semitic sort of type of eugenics, but there were some ideas that these two milieux shared over, population planning. Yeah, so I think we have a question here. I see the hands.
Yeah, Paula, would you like to add something to that, or otherwise I would ask?
So, for example, what I do at the moment, so my education sessions are paid by the local authorities in London, who actually who think about, well, I'm not a fan of this wording, but more communities that are harder to reach, but there are no really harder to reach communities. There are just services that are not accessible for everyone. So let's think from that perspective. So of course, there must be a program. There must be some extra education in place. So we can't reach everyone through schools or through mainstream schools. So it's really important to teach across everywhere. So we also work in special schools. We work with young people with disabilities. We work with refugees as well, or young people seeking asylum in the UK. So because of course there are many groups that are more vulnerable than others.
So. Rakesh, please go ahead. Ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. Congratulations, Agnieszka, for this book and the discussion that I was following. I was just, as Professor Kraft nicely pointed out about an elephant in the room, I was thinking whether the book will have your own understanding of how media is playing out in the entire, because media has become a super educator. And in that sense, the contest is emerging between the state and media and the politics. So it is in this context, I was also wondering how, in 80s, if you remember Ceausescu's Romania, which has very stringent rules about contraceptions and abortion and all. So the core, which is economy for some, but also the entire notion of demography, and in this today's global situation, when most countries are going through this demographic debate within the country, where the right wing comes with a kind of agenda to retain its population or to increase it, where ethnic population will be in the majority, as against in some places refugees, some places migrants, some places some other communities. So it is in this cauldron that I was wondering whether you have through your field work, both of you and other ways, the role of media that is intervening into the educating part of, whether it's going from a more liberatory part or it's constricting the discussion. in terms of, that's why in many countries, media is being blocked by the state, which many very extremely conservative parties come to play. But in some places it is not. So what is the state of media in Poland, for example, in terms of sex education? Thank you.
Thank you, Rakesh. And maybe we could just add one question which appeared in the chat by Sheng Peng, a colleague of ours at RECET, who asked whether you could specifically draw attention to the role of social media and their decentral kind of way of disseminating information, and whether social media groups have an impact on this debate.
Should I go first, or Paula, do you want? So on media, definitely there is a lot of sex education going through media, and both historically and today. So back in the 1930s, the media around the Polish League for Sexual Reform, you know, they published a paper, and there was a lot of things there. And then under communism, you have major youth or student magazine or women's magazine running sex columns. So of course, and then after socialism, we already heard about Paula going to breakfast TV to talk about sexuality. So I think there are definitely a lot of going on, but then also media and also social media, they are very diverse, and the message could be really mixed, because under socialism you have state controlled media, and there are certain things that could be placed there, and there's censorship, and a lot of authors would censor themselves in order to pass through censorship. But then after socialism, there's no censorship, and then everything can appear, whatever could be funded. So then there will be like a more diverse message, and the same on social media, that you have this really diverse message, and often very much polarized, you know, on the lines of let's call them conservative, progressive. And then this is why sex education in schools is so important, because some people will find this in the media and others will find that. And the same on social media, that there is such a, you know, to use this Catholic word, disorder in those media messages, that I think for young people is really important, that there's certain things that they get some tools at schools, thanks to which they can sort this knowledge. So, and if they don't, it could be very difficult for them, because most of the things that are being found in the especially on the internet that are related to sex is pornography, which could be, I'm not like I don't want to sound that I think it's pornography should have been illegal or something like that, because I don't, but I think it could be harmful for young people to watch some kind of hardcore pornography and think that this is how sex looks. So, but I'm sure that Paula has more to say about this. Would you?
Yeah, may I just add a little question, because I was waiting for it, and Agnieszka nearly already not answered it. But Paula, in the very beginning, you said that the internet was also some kind of game changer and gate opener to reach out for young people. But on the other hand, we know that of course you can find a vast field of information, but it must be also a new challenge for sex educators to navigate young people through the information they have access to nowadays.
Absolutely. So, well, in the past, adults could avoid sex education, and it was always this topic was avoided. But now, because of the internet and because of porn, so yes, if adults are not going to talk to young people about sex, they will learn from porn. And because we know that the average age when the young people access porn is 11, probably they're not looking for it at this age, but someone will show it to them. So, like, we have no choice. Like, we have to prepare them with what they're going to see, and they have to be mindful of what they're watching, because there are many risks involved. I'm not also against porn, yes, but we have to prepare young people for that. But there are other risks as well when it comes to sexting. Well, sexting has some benefits as well because there is no STI transmission or risk of pregnancy, obviously, but there are other risks involved. So we need to have conversations. It's also used in an abusive way because we know that there is a lot of abuse going on online, or some people who would exploiting people also, they meet them online very often. So of course we need to have these conversations. When it comes to social media, absolutely, I think people and single activists, so activists who are not affiliated with any big organizations, also got their own voice, which is absolutely amazing. I think for the LGBT plus populations, it's fantastic because finally they can see the whole diversity. Because of course the problem of these big organizations, and well, kind of the same with Ponton, like focus on preventing unintended pregnancy, for example, and we talk a lot about contraception, but this is not the topic that would be interesting for everyone, and it's not relevant to everyone's lives. So it's great that we can see more and more people, and we can meet internationally now without traveling and have all these conversations. So it opened up a lot. Me personally, I learned a lot on Instagram, for example, on Facebook, but we need to remember that these platforms are not necessarily super sex positive. Well, like they are more like coming from the conservative American background, so they also limit people's activity. For example, they limit some hashtags, even if this hashtag is, for example, the vagina, which is not a bad word, is just an organ in the human body, but they don't support that. So we also need to be mindful that a lot is going on social media as well. But in general, I think it's a great place to learn.
Yes,
There's
we
a-
have. Yeah, please, please, Agnieszka.
Yeah, no, but I thought that we have an interesting comment in the.
Exactly. Should I read it? Or Lucy,
maybe
are you
Lucia
there and
will-
want to raise it yourself? No. Oh, okay, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm from Czech Republic, and as you mentioned, the social media, what I see here is in the Czech Republic, where the situation is different from Poland. But what I see is that the social media play a very strong role and are quite successful. And there is one podcast on sexuality that has several thousands of followers, and then one quite new NGO started by a young activist. They're called Consent, and they also are very successful on social media and have on Instagram they have like 30,000 followers, which is quite a lot in Czech Republic.
Thank you. Thank you, because we were somehow limited to the Polish case quite a lot right now, and we would love to open it up to more cases and contexts. We are already approaching the end. I put myself on the list. I would ask everyone who has a question still, please, this is the last chance to put a sign into the chat. And I want to ask this question before we then have a final round, maybe. And maybe it might be a stimulus for this final round, because we and Paulina, Paula, you just touched upon that in what you said. The question of language. You recalled that the hashtag vagina is, for example, limited, and that it's also present in Agnieszka's book, that the question of how young, but also not just young people, how we talk about sexuality, it's so sensitive and at the same time apparently often very problematic. You're recalling those situations that if there is, or most often there is a lack of words, or there are many myths, stereotypes, or vulgarisms, which then are connected to practices like abuse or people disrespecting the other gender, or people with non-heterogeneous sexuality, sexual orientation, and so on and so forth. So would you see as kind of also an opening up to our present situation and maybe the future? From all what we said now, how is language about sexuality changing? Is there a substantial change going on towards whatever, the better or not? And what would you see as a desideratum, as something that should be or could be achieved if things would go as you would imagine them to go?
That's a very, very important question. And this is, again, the core of my work as well, talking about language and identifying and just making people just realize like what kind of language we use when we talk about human sexuality in general. So unfortunately, in many languages, or most languages, I don't know, the names for people's genitals are used as insults. And this is the reality that we have, unfortunately. And medical words have also, because of the taboo, and this topic was not that spoken much, the medical words were usually used by medical professionals, and that's it. So even today, parents don't feel comfortable with their children using the word the penis or the vulva, not the vagina, but the vulva, because they will think that they will be judged by others, so by other parents, and maybe this is inappropriate, and why children, like, yeah, so they come up with other words for these body parts, for example, but it starts there. It starts very early. So, so my message would be, of course, to not too shy away from using correct medical words, because then you give children a language to talk about what's happening to them when it comes to their health, if they have any issue, or abuse as well. So it's extremely important in not preventing maybe, but at least empowering young people when it comes to speaking up about sexual abuse. Unfortunately, it happens a lot everywhere in the world. So if they have language, then they may feel more empowered, and they know that there is someone that they can talk to if anything happened to them. So yeah, that's my that's my statement.
Okay, so let me just, because I would like to end with something positive, because usually we end those conversations with some kind of vision of disaster future. so I mean, I personally I am a product of communist sex education, and I read all those books, sex education books under socialism, and that's why I was able to write more than one book on sexuality in Poland, because I knew that you can write about these things, and that there is a discursive space for discussing sexuality and various aspects of sexuality. And this language I knew before I went through all gender studies readings and so on. And then I think it's also broader that if we look at the history of sex education in Poland, and we look at sex education in the past and today, we see that in a way it was and it is successful. If you look at changes on how young people's sexual encounter changed from what we know about this in the early 20th century and how it's going on today, it is way more democratic today, and it's not that boys from good families just force their servants to sex. It's just, I think quite often young people just have sex because they love each other, or they want to try, they're curious, they want pleasure, but not necessarily, it's not so power driven. And I think this is partly, I mean, I'm not saying that's ideal, but this kind of changes towards more democratic consent forms of young sex, it's a result of, it's a success of 100 years of sex education. I don't think Paula is very convinced of this optimistic note, but yeah, but I think we should also see that some things were done actually and brought positive results.
No, absolutely. There is a change. I absolutely agree, especially when if we just ignore the school system and politics, etc. If we talk to young people, absolutely, and they feel more empowered, and we can tell, and they're absolutely amazing. So if in doubt, go to them and ask them. And it's always important to ask them what they have already learned and what they would like to learn. And they are usually very, very grateful if someone actually wants to talk about sex education with them.
Yeah, in person on social media, like Lucia was suggesting, that you can go around the government, even in Poland, as we see in the chat. Thanks for thanks for that.
Yeah, I think this is a great final note with this positive tone, especially on now I'm forgetting what I wanted to say, but yeah, thanks a lot. I think, yeah, now I got it back. It is, in the end, it is about listening to young people, or to people in general, how they speak about sex, and giving them a voice, I think. Because then you see much more than if you look at the cultural, or not cultural, but the political wars and those polarized debates, maybe. And I hope, to a certain extent, this is what we achieved by this event as well. So getting a bit closer to the experiences, the talking, or the language about sex, and seeing how sensitive this topic is, and how much is kind of in the box when we look at how people and where they get their knowledge about sexuality from. For us, it has been extremely interesting also to hear from you about those long historical continuities, about the non-linearity of changes going on, and about all those, let's say, intersections with economic, cultural, also racial issues we have been touching upon, and this I think leaves us with much food for thought. So for me, it remains only to thank you again very much. We hope to have an occasion to meet in person in some nearer future, and this is all from my side. Stephanie, please, if you...
Also, just thank you from my side for this very down-to-earth insights that I enjoyed a lot. And also me, I'm really hoping that our paths will cross again on this topic or another, but first and foremost in person.
Thank you. That would be great.
Yeah.